In the mid-1930s, in Germany, this conversation took place. It was Claire talking to her friend Annette. Claire eventually became a nun, but died very soon, still young, and they found this conversation among her notes. However, it's not a conversation like any other, because it came to us after the death of Annette. Once you took me to task, said Annette in this strange communication. In place of a genuflection touching the ground, I did barely an informal wobble, and you didn't even seem to have any suspicion that I by then had already stopped believing in the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. Now, where she is, I believe, but only in a natural way, as one believes in a storm, in hearing its effects. In the meantime, I had made do with a religion of my own fashioning. I upheld the opinion, which was common among us at the office, that the soul after death went into another being, in such a way that it went on roaming like this unceasingly. Therewith, the worrying question of the hereafter was resolved and rendered quite innocuous. How many people have found various forms of Eastern spirituality a la mode, fashionable in our day? Little by little, I created for myself a God sufficiently padded to be called God, far enough away from me for me not to have to maintain any relation with him, vague enough either to be allowed to resemble a pantheistic God, or to let himself be turned into poetry as a solitary God, as the need required. This God had no paradise with which to reward me, no more than any hell to inflict upon me. I left him in peace. That was the rough total of my worship of him. Many argue from the premise, I don't believe in anything in the beyond after death. Then they make the second declaration mentally, what I believe is true. The reason, of course, being because I believe it. And then, because that second declaration is faulty, the syllogism which concludes, therefore there is nothing in the beyond, is faulty also. What is in our mind is in our mind. It has no power to alter what is outside our mind, including what we cannot see. The fact that we cannot see anything in a dead person in a corpse doesn't mean that the dead person is not seeing anything. Logic, if it is honest, is humble. It does not teach reality, but is taught by reality, even the reality that at present it does not see. We believe without difficulty in what pleases us. Thus it is that with the course of the years I made myself sufficiently convinced of my religion not to be bothered by it. Now her attention was drawn by the immediacy of a relationship. This can happen. In place of worshipping God, we can actually give our attention, our mind, our heart, and even our soul to something less than God in a relationship. In that lay my apostasy of God, in that I had made a creature my idol. Never can such a thing take place entirely except in a person's love for the other sex, when this love remains enclosed in purely earthly satisfactions. It is, moreover, this total abandonment that forms its attraction, its stimulant, and its venom. For me, in the person of Max, this adoration became a lived-out religion. During this same period at the office, I lashed out sourly at everything to do with church, priests, indulgences, the muttering of rosaries, and other absurdities. We have evidence from this of the kind of things that will be said amongst them. One moment saw this strange scene. Annette lit a match, held it right before Claire, and said, "Does this smell of hell?" The pain of a flame, and immediately Claire, put it out. So Annette was in this mode of attack and, as it were, raising the voice and making little of the thought coming at her by blocking it out with strong words of argument, all the stronger because they were not secure deep down. You used to try, with varying degrees of lucidity, to stand up for these things, without an inkling, or so it seemed, of the fact that in my inmost self I was not arguing in reality against them, but seeking rather something to back up my conscience. I was then in need of such backing in order to justify my apostasy by reason. In our time, the scandal by this one or that one in church life has become a lever. The problem is not other people's sins, but our own. Deep down, I was revolting against God. You didn't understand. I still passed for a Catholic, and desired to be called such. I even went as far as paying the church taxes. A certain counter-insurance couldn't do any harm, I thought to myself. The other just continued to try and warn and indicate. It sometimes happened that your answers struck me, but they had no hold on me because you oughtn't to be right. When I was a child, I heard one day in the course of a sermon that God rewards every good work that each person does, and when he cannot reward it in the other life, he does so upon earth. That is quite correct. Unexpectedly, I received an inheritance from Auntie Lot, and my husband succeeded in acquiring quite respectable earnings. I was thus enabled to set out my new dwelling in a really attractive way. Religion by now sent me its light from very far away, a light that was pale, feeble, and uncertain. The city cafes, the hotels we stopped at on our journeys certainly didn't draw us closer to God. And here we have the situation of civilized man in our time in one magisterial phrase coming from the beyond. All who frequented these places were living with their interior on the exterior. The soul of man is not looked after, and it's the only bit that after death goes on. What is the use of a well-kept body when the soul inside is putrid? This was what came back from the beyond. During the autumn of 1937, I was spending my holidays beside Lake Garda. My mother wrote to me towards the second week in September. Who would have imagined? Annette has been killed in a car accident. She was buried yesterday at the forest cemetery. The news terrified me. I knew that she had never been very religious. Was she ready when God called her in this way, without the slightest warning? The following morning, I heard Holy Mass for her in the chapel belonging to the sisters with whom I was lodging. I prayed fervently for the repose of her soul, and offered likewise my communion for this intention. But throughout the day I felt a certain unease. which towards evening became even more acute. I went to sleep in a worried state. Eventually, I was awoken by a loud thud. I put the light on. The time on the clock was 10 minutes past midnight. No one was to be seen. Not a sound in the house. The only noise to be heard was that of Lake Garda's waters swishing monotonously against the bank that formed the border of the hospice garden. There was not even a whistle of wind to be heard. And yet, at the moment of my sudden arousal, in addition to the thump, I had thought I perceived a sound like that of the wind, similar to the one produced when my boss in the office, in a bad temper, passed me a letter in a heated manner. I turned over, said a few Our Fathers for the souls in purgatory, and went back to sleep. I had a dream. I dreamt that I had got up in the morning about 6 a.m. to go to the hospice chapel, when on opening my bedroom door, I discovered a bundle of letter paper. Picking it up, recognizing Annette's handwriting, and screaming was but one act. With the sheets in my hands, I was quivering. I realized that in such a state of mind I was incapable of reciting as much as an Our Father, and that all the more so as a sensation of asphyxia overwhelmed me at the same time. I found no better solution than getting out into the fresh air. I put my hair in some kind of order, hid the letter in my handbag, and left the house. I took up the letter. There was no signature, but there was no doubt about it. It was Annette's writing. It was only when we got on to religious questions that she could become venomous and take the tone of this letter. This piece of writing from the beyond I will here set down, literally and just as I read it then. It ran thus: Claire, you can stop praying for me. I'm damned. If I let you know it and expatiate on the matter at some length, don't imagine that it is in any way on the score of friendship. We who are here have no more love for anyone. I do so as though constrained to do good because I am on the side of that power that always wills evil but does good. The truth is that I would like to see you ending in this state in which I have cast my anchor forever. Don't be surprised at this intention. Here, this is how we all think. Our will is fixed in evil. Or at least in what you people call evil. Thus it is that when we do something good, as I am right now in opening your eyes on hell, none of that proceeds from good intentions. she goes through her life. And this is how we know it's authentic, because there's no way that Claire could have known all the details of her life, and they were verified afterwards, and each detail was correct. You know the period of my youth. I'll fill in a few details. By my parents' plan, to tell the truth, I ought never to have existed. It was for them, in actual fact, a disgrace. When I arrived on the scene, my two sisters were 14 and 15. Had I never been born, could I now be annihilated and escape from these torments? No will could be as strong as the one with which I would relinquish my existence, like clothing made of ashes, to be scattered in the void. But I have to exist. I have to exist as I was made, with a truncated existence. And then the whole story is given. How the parents had met in a dancing place, and 6 months later they had to get married. And on it goes, and on it goes. And towards the end, we have this. A week ago, I speak with your figures. As regards the pain, I could say without exaggerating that this is my 10th year of burning in hell. A week ago, then, my husband and I were on an outing for the Sunday, our last. It was dawning radiantly. I felt as well as ever I had felt. A sinister feeling of well-being pervaded me and wriggled about within me throughout the day. Then suddenly, without the slightest warning, on the return journey, my husband was dazzled by a car that was coming whizzing towards us. He lost control. Years came out of my lips like a shiver, not as a prayer, but as a cry. A rending pain overwhelmed me completely. Yet, when I compare it with my present one, it was a trifle. Then I lost consciousness. It's strange that in the course of that same morning, this thought had once more come to my mind, quite inexplicably. You could go one more time to Mars. It resounded within me like an imploration. Categorically and resolutely, my "No!" cut short the thread of my thoughts. With all these things, we must be finished once and for all. Let me bear all the weight of any consequences there may be. Now I am carrying them. The things that happened after my death, you know them already. My husband's fate, my mother's, what happened to my corpse, and the way the funeral ran. All these I knew by means of the natural perceptions that we have here. As for what happens upon earth, we have a vague sort of knowledge of it. But the things that in some way concern us directly, these we know. Thus I can see right now where you are staying. As for me, at the moment of my death, I woke suddenly out of the fog. I found myself as though flooded by a dazzling light. I was on the very spot on which my corpse was lying. It was as it happens in the theatre, when, in one go, all the lights go out, leaving nothing to be seen but the stage. The curtains separate with a great din and open on an unexpected scene, horribly luminous. The scene of my life. As though in a great mirror, my soul showed itself to itself. The graces spurned from my early days right up to the last "No!" in God's face. I felt like an assassin who, during a judicial prosecution, has just been presented with his lifeless victim. Repent? Never! Be ashamed? Never! And yet, neither could I resist under the eyes of God, whom I had rejected. One thing alone was left to me. Escape! As Cain ran away from the corpse of his brother Abel, even so was my soul repelled outside, far away from this horrible sight. It was the particular judgment. The invisible judge was saying, "Depart from me." Then my soul, like a shadow coated with brimstone, threw itself into everlasting torment. Years ago, little Yaakov and Ishka went missing. Yaakov's mother, Medjugorje, was worried and asked everywhere, "Where is my son? He was supposed to be there for tea. He just disappeared." She was really worried. Our Lady had come for them. "Would you like to come on a journey?" Yaakov had been very practical. "How long will it take? I have to plant the tobacco in the fields." And nevertheless, the Madonna had taken them, had given one hand to Jacob and one to Vishka, and they went. But he took really his body with him, and it's quite unusual that this could happen. But the very fact that the mother was so concerned shows that it was a genuine journey into the beyond, and that Our Blessed Lady, and she made this known to them, wanted this to happen so that they could warn others. And she showed them heaven, purgatory, and hell. Heaven was something that we possibly can't imagine. Purgatory had all kinds of levels. There was a mist, kind of fog, which didn't allow them to see people there who they might recognize, but it was full of people. But the lowest level was very, very close to hell, and people there suffered terribly. And then there was shown hell itself. And this very thing that we've just heard came through. The soul itself threw itself into hell. And this bit came also out. They saw that there were souls just going down, but as soon as they got into there, they actually began to change form and to resemble the ones that were with them evermore. And this also was seen at Fatima. The torment was torment of bad company forever. This is never said, this is never preached. And we know from exorcism that that is precisely what the devil wants, and make sure that it's never talked about. And the devil has explained that the less it's talked about, the more it fills up.